The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We have lots of information to share with you today from our presenter, and so I'm going to go ahead and get us started, even though we do still have some people logging in. Hopefully they will catch up with us soon. So welcome. I am Kim Brown with the Rural Institute for Inclusive Communities, Transition and Employment Projects, and Teresa Baldry and I will be your moderators today. Live captioning is available for the session. And Susan, if you could please advance to the next slide. To access the captions, open the captioning link that I've posted in our chat box. It's also on the slide in front of you. And you want to open that in a new browser window. Then you can adjust your browser window to whatever size you want and see the captions as you view the slides from today's webinar. The captions do scroll up from the bottom, so you may want to put the caption box toward the bottom of your screen so that you're still able to see the presentation slides. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Montana Deaf-Blind Project, which is funded in whole or in part by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, and through a contract with Children's Special Health Services at the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The statements shared in the presentation do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the sponsoring departments. All attendees are currently muted. This helps cut down on any background noise. However, if you want to ask the presenter a question or make a comment, please feel free to type your question or comment into the chat box. And do know that only you, the presenter, and the moderators will be able to see what you've typed into the chat box. And our presenter will have several question and answer periods today, but feel free to type your question or comment in at any time, and then our moderators will read those out during the question and answer time. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar, and it can take up to a couple of weeks for us to get those sent out. Please know that you do have to have pre-registered and requested those credits in order to receive them. We do have a certificate of attendance that GoToWebinar will automatically send you in a follow-up email tomorrow. So if you need a certificate of attendance for your employment or for your credentialing, that will be emailed to you tomorrow. Today's session is being recorded for the Montana Deaf-Blind Project and Transition and Employment Projects resource libraries. And by participating in the webinar, you grant permission for any chats and/or questions that you submit through the webinar platform to be recorded. The video for today's webinar will be posted to our training archives pages, and I will put both of those URLs or website addresses in the chat box a little bit later during the webinar. The handouts for today's session are also posted to both of those websites, or you can download them directly from the GoToWebinar site. In order to do that, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should see an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that, it will open your GoToWebinar dashboard. That's where you'll see the chat box that you can enter any questions. That's also where you'll see the website URLs or website addresses that I put in for the training archives. And you'll see a box called Handouts. If you click on that, you can download the handout for today's presentation and also the slides that our presenter has provided for you. At the end of today's webinar, a survey link will pop up. Please do take the time to answer those questions. I think we only have 6 or 8 on there, and we really appreciate your feedback. If you don't have a chance to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar today, the link will be in the follow-up email that you receive tomorrow. And we don't expect you to fill out the survey twice, but please do either complete it after the session today or when you receive that follow-up email tomorrow. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Ellen Condon, who is the director of the Montana Deaf-Blind Project and the Montana Transition and Employment Projects, to give us a bit of information about the Montana Deaf-Blind Project. Take it away, Ellen.
Thanks, Kim. And I have a slight correction. I'm the co-director of the Montana Deaf-Blind Project with Kim Brown, who you just heard from. But we are basically, the Deafblind Project is a source of specialized information, technical assistance, and resources that are focused on improving the early identification, education, inclusion, and college and career readiness for individuals with combined hearing and vision loss between the ages of birth and 21. So these are students who have both impact to vision and to hearing. And a big part of our project is increasing awareness of the prevalence of this combined dual sensory loss, and also making sure those students are identified so that people understand how to ensure students are getting access to information, access to adequate accommodations, and supports that enable them to have high expectations for adult life. So our project builds capacity and infrastructure throughout the state. This is our kickoff for a 3-webinar series where we invited Susan Wyszynski, who's going to talk about just the foundations of deafblindness so that we can increase the awareness of a dual sensory impairment and also the identification of these students as early as we possibly can. The Montana Deafblind Project is one of 54 state or multi-state projects in the country. We're all federally funded to provide technical assistance around children and youth with deafblindness. And we're based at the University of Montana's Rural Institute. There are 3 of us on the project, Kim Brown, myself, and Teresa Baldry, and we are all part-time. The 3 of us together make up one full-time position. So there's information on the screen right now about our website, which provides more information and resources around deafblindness, how to refer a student if you think they may have a dual sensory impairment, and also if you're looking for additional resources for teachers or parents or that student, please contact us. So I'm handing it back to Kim. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. And without further ado, I would like to introduce and thank our speaker today. We are delighted to have with us Dr. Susan M. Wyszynski. Susan is a professor of special education and is currently serving as the interim dean of the Missouri Western State University Graduate School. She has more than 40 years of experience working with learners who experience multiple disabilities, including deafblindness and Charge syndrome. Throughout her career, Susan's research interests and areas of expertise include early communication, gestural communication and language development, augmentative communication, and cochlear implants for learners who experience deafblindness. I can also tell you that Susan is an absolute delight to work with, and we are so pleased to have her here today. So with that, I would like to turn it over to you, Susan.
Okay, thank you. This is Susan, and I am thrilled that all of you who've chosen to join us today have taken time out of what I know is a hectic, very busy schedule. Ellen stole some of the thunder that I have for you today, and in 2 sentences, I think she said what was one of my 2 key takeaway points. So it's going to take me an hour to say what Ellen said in a sentence or 2. And Kim, I thank you for the very generous introduction. And that's a long way of saying, man, if she's done all that, she's really old. And I say, yep, that's true too. So, you know, it's okay. But I hope that through the webinar that we have today, I'm going to put out some teasers for you, because I'm thrilled that Teresa and Kim and Ellen have invited me to join all of you for this 3-webinar series. So a couple times I'm going to just drop a little factoid and say, we're going to talk about that in the next webinar, or we're going to talk about that in the 3rd webinar. And I'm just really happy to be with all of you. I wish I could see you all. I wish I could talk to all of you. And since I can't do that, Kim, if you would be kind enough to launch the first poll for me, I would really love to know who is here, please. And what I'm asking of you is, if you're a parent, guardian, or very close family member, maybe you're a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle who's actually raising a child or young adult with deafblindness, if you are a paraeducator, if you're a teacher in any role, a general ed teacher, sped teacher, teacher of the deaf, hard of hearing, TVI, mark the third box, fourth box, related service provider, any flavor, comms, nursing, speech language, PT, OT. And then if I haven't hit on who you are, I apologize, but I can only have 5 answers. So I do have an other category. And if you do check the 5th box, other, if you could type who you are in the chat, that would be wonderful, because I'm seeing, wow, I'm seeing 53% of others. So I'm parents. No, I've got parents on there. I thought I intended to put parents on there. Can't wait to see who you all are.
We have about 72% of you who voted, so let's give another minute to let folks type in their vote, and then I will go ahead and show the results of the poll, Susan.
Please, I'm very interested to know, because there's a significant percentage of other, and I'm very curious who you folks are.
While we're waiting, I will answer some of the others for you, Susan.
Okay, great.
We have an SLP who's also a deafblind specialist here to learn how you provide this information so I can improve my own outreach. Coordinator for Pennsylvania I Can Connect Equipment Distribution Program for those who are deafblind, and co-chair of the Pennsylvania Deafblind Advisory Committee. One
great.
that's great. I checked the wrong box. So
yeah, I would have expected to be related service cat speech. So okay.
Yep. And then we have a youth transition specialist joining us from Wyoming, and children and youth special health services Title V.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you all. I will try to bear this in mind, and I'm glad. I thank you, Kim, for posting the results so everybody can see, and thank you, Teresa, for reading that for me. If I advance the slides, will the poll disappear? Okay, thank you. I think we will get started. I will try to bear in mind what you've said. Some of the stuff today, and I don't mean this as an excuse, but this is very foundational, basic information. So please, this is my disclaimer. I don't want to insult anybody. For people who have had any significant exposure to a learner who experiences deafblindness, I think you're going to say, yeah, go on. But we hope that part of the participants in the webinar series would be folks who are brand new or relatively new to the field of deafblindness, and we need to start from a strong foundation. So I'm not trying to insult anybody, and I hope that even if this is information you've heard before and it's somewhat familiar, my philosophy, and in the classes I teach, my philosophy is it can't hurt to review things. And so we pull them out of the back of our minds and bring them to the front of our minds. So I hope that everybody can catch something new today. These will be our primary topics. We'll try to give you a functional definition of deafblindness. I'll expand on what Ellen described in her introduction. We'll talk about the primary etiologies associated with deafblindness. We'll talk about 4 overarching categories of DB, and in each of those, we'll talk about the time of the onset of the loss, the degree of the loss, and the type of loss a learner experiences. And then the final topic for today is really more of a teaser for the next webinar. The final 4 or 5 slides are about the general impact of deafblindness on a learner's interactions in the environment, with the environment itself or with other people in the environment. So this is where you do have one handout. I have more handouts for the second and third webinars, but there is an action planning sheet. I hope that you will feel that I've tried to ground this in what's practical information. We all need some understanding of basic theory and basic research, but if what we're talking about isn't grounded in what difference is it going to make for me in my classroom next week or tomorrow, or what's going to make a difference in my home this weekend, I'm not sure that it's all that important to spend a lot of time talking about. So we have to try to translate research and theory into action steps. So I'm really big on action planning. My students right now, even though they're on break, they're rolling their eyes at me when I'm saying this. So there is an action plan sheet, and I just hope that as we go through the information today, you might make some notes for yourselves. I hope everybody has at least one note in the next hour and a half. If you have more than one, I'll call it a win, but I would love it if you could each make at least one note about how you might incorporate something about which we talked today in your daily practice. And since we don't have any families, I don't have to say family life, but we'll say in your daily practice or your consultation or your work with transition and job placement with learners who experience deaf-blindness. So that's today's handout. I think it's very important to start with a functional definition. One thing you'll figure out about me really fast from this slide, and it will continue on through, I like color, and I use color to try to emphasize things that I think are really important. So if it's in a color that's not black, that is Susan's subtle way, which I've now blown, but that's my way of saying, pay attention to this, please, it's really important. And I think to the lay person, this is a really common misunderstanding that when people who are not trained, who don't have experience with an individual who experiences deafblindness, they think deafblind, can't hear, can't see anything. And that simply is not what is required for a learner to qualify, as Ellen said, for the Montana Deaf-Blind Project Services from birth through 21 years of age. They don't have to hear nothing, see nothing. That is not the implication. That is not an appropriate definition. An appropriate definition of DB simply means that that particular individual experiences some type of vision and some type of hearing loss to some degree. In other words, I hate to use this, but they don't have normal, they don't have typical vision across the board. They don't have typical hearing across the board. Something is different about the way that individual hears or sees that cannot be corrected back to that typical or normal range with corrective lenses or those types of things. Also, and this is more of a teaser, we'll talk about it a lot in the second webinar, an individual may qualify for a label of deaf-blindness by having some type of visual processing disorder and or having some type of auditory processing disorder. Because when push comes to shove, neuroscientists will tell us we really see with our brains and we really hear with our brains. Our eyeballs and our optic nerves and our ears and the bones in our inner ears and the auditory nerves, they're what get the sensations into our brains, but our brains have to process that information to make it meaningful. So even if a learner has some type of processing disorder in vision and or hearing, that learner may qualify as a learner under the label of deaf-blindness. Whoops. In the United States, just under 10,000 children and youth, birth through 21, experience deaf-blindness. These figures are a little bit older. I noticed that just recently I was back on the National Center for Deaf-Blindness website, and the number's a little bit higher than 9,904, but it's just under 10,000. But of this number, going back to what I just was explaining, only approximately 5% of that total, all right, experience total deafness and total blindness. And I think the rest of that sentence is thank goodness, right? We're really glad that only 5% of the children and youth who are served by these 54 deafblind projects experience total sensory losses in vision and hearing. If you take the entire population of children and young adults who experience deafblindness, approximately 91%, so 9 out of 10 of those learners also experience at least one other type of disability. And I think the go-to, again, with many lay people is, oh, well, if they have a vision loss and a hearing loss, the additional disability must be a cognitive disorder, must be an intellectual impairment. And that's not a fair conclusion to draw. There are learners with whom I've worked that qualify for the label deafblind that are brilliant, but have a physical disability, that are brilliant, but have health impairment, seizure disorder, something like that. So don't make an assumption that if the child or a young adult has an additional disability, that it is automatically that learner also experiences intellectual problems. Teresa, do you want me to stop for just a second to see if there are any questions relevant to these first few slides, or should we move on?
Please keep moving. No questions at present.
No questions. Clear as mud. Okay, we're going to keep going. So how do you know? How do you know if someone has deafblindness? I think these two questions are fabulous. And I use them, or I try to use them, to ground my own practice. I have said them in team meetings when people look at me like, you're just being a smart aleck, right? And it's like, no, I'm serious. I want you to think about these two questions because I think they're the essence of what our field is all about. So the two questions, you can't ask only one, you have to ask them as a pair. Does that learner have enough vision to compensate for whatever her lack of hearing ability is? All right. And the second question, does that learner have enough hearing to compensate for her lack of vision or her vision impairment, whatever that is? And if you answer no to those questions, then that is very, very likely a learner who qualifies for this label of deafblindness. And I think it was implied, and Ellen, you can jump in and correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think it was implied in Ellen's opening remarks that people in our field believe, I know I, Susan Bashinsky, believe, there are many, many learners who really qualify for this label, but don't receive the label. And on the one hand, labels are stigmatizing, and if kids get labeled as having a certain disability, it can be very difficult for them ever to, quote, escape that label, shed that label. But if kids who experience multiple disabilities, they have intellectual problems, they have physical disabilities, their brain has suffered trauma, assault, injury, why is it logical to assume there was no effect on processing of vision information and no effect on processing of hearing information? And the thing about that I would advocate for is, instead of having that learner labeled as having multiple, disabilities, if a learner is labeled as having deafblindness, that learner qualifies for so many additional services. So I don't want to label kids, but if it can get them resources and get them supports and get them the expertise of Teresa and Kim and Ellen in the state of Montana, why would we not care enough to try to make that happen? So, deafblindness. What senses does deafblindness affect? Well, we know vision, hearing, right? So you're saying, duh, all right? But I think it's another interesting way to look at the senses impacted by deafblindness are to say that deafblindness affects 2 of the 3 distance senses that each of us has. All right, we have 3 distance senses, and deaf-blindness affects 2 of them. Well, because of that, it really necessitates that in order to develop social skills, develop cognitive skills, develop academic achievement, just to find a meaningful place in the world, ultimately live as independently as possible, get a job, it necessitates that that learner use her impact senses, all right? And I've shown you that the impact senses are gustatory, taste, tactile, tactual, and kinesthetic senses to gather information. And I would hope that if you step back and think about that for a minute, that the only way or the main ways in which you're going to gain information from your environment is going to be through taste, touch, and kinesthesis. I think it's very limiting. And I think it gives us a perspective that we might benefit from in our daily practice. So Teresa, if you could launch the second poll for me, please, I would appreciate it. Not Teresa, Kim, sorry, got my people mixed up. Second poll. So in association with what I've just been talking about, to which senses are we referring or am I referring when I speak of distance senses? So there's 4 choices. I want you to pick the one best answer. Vision, hearing, vision and hearing, or vision, hearing, and smell.
And this is Kim, and the votes are coming in quickly.
Yeah.
I'll see when we get at about 80%. I'll go ahead and share for you.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. I will go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Thank you. So yes, you guys are really sharp and you're on it. There was a hint in the last slide, and many of you picked up on that. When we talk about distant senses, we truly are talking about option 4, vision and hearing and smell. And nearly half of you chose that answer. I love that nearly everybody else chose vision and hearing, and we go, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, because those certainly are the 2 main senses about which we're focusing today. But smell is also a distant sense. And many learners who experience deaf-blindness have that sense available too. So they have one of their 3 distant senses, smell, that can provide them information along with those impact senses of taste, touch, and kinesthetic sense. Okay, thank you, Kim. So let's take a quick review through each of those distant senses. Smell. Smells can be used to identify a person. Smell, according to neuroscientists, smell is one of the most primitive senses to develop. It's one whose memories are longest lasting in our brains. I remember one of my own experiences that really kind of freaked me out and cemented this notion in my mind was I went back to campus where I did my undergraduate work many, many years after I had graduated, and I walked into one dorm that I had lived in my sophomore year, and the minute I was in the lobby, I was overcome with the smell of that dorm. And it wasn't that it was a stinky, distasteful smell, but it was a unique smell. And I went, oh my goodness, I'm back in Mark Twain Hall. And I never thought about it. I've never smelled it anywhere since. And that was a good 15 years. And I'd never thought about the way that hall smelled when I lived there, but it really struck me. And I think we recognize the smells. And some of you who have more experience, you may wear a certain kind of chapstick or a certain kind of perfume or a certain kind of hand lotion, or for the gentleman, you may wear a certain kind of aftershave or something that helps you identify yourself to a learner with deaf-blindness. The only risk there is they can't quit making that brand of perfume or cologne or aftershave, or you're really in trouble, right? but it can be used to identify a person. And I've worked with teams in the past where sometimes when learners' vision and hearing are so poor that we rely on smell for personal identification. Families can do the same thing as well. I think all of us might have a certain grandma that we remember, that when you walked in grandma's house, it smelled like this rose hand cream that she had, or something. I mean, smells are powerful. Think about the smell of coffee if you're a coffee drinker. If I walk in a movie theater and did we used to do that? I think we used to do that. And it's like you got to smell the popcorn, right? So smell is very powerful. It can evoke very strong memories. But I would encourage all of you to ask the third question on this slide: is smell even available? Because especially with learners who have charge syndrome, many kids with charge syndrome do not have a sense of smell. None, zero. And that's a piece of learning we need to remember, in my opinion. So let's take a quick look at hearing. It's important for understanding spoken language, you know that. It also provides us with a whole lot of environmental cues. We can hear about how crowded a room is. We can hear if there's traffic on the street. We can get echoes if we're in a gymnasium. There's all kinds of environmental cues, to which many of which those of us who have typical hearing ignore. Possibly we ignore them because they would drive us crazy if we paid attention to them all the time. But I think we need to be conscious of the fact that for learners who have vision and hearing loss, sometimes we need to accentuate those environmental cues and take advantage of them. But a very important question to ask about hearing is hearing available in, even when it's at its maximum, it can be for a particular learner, in one ear or both ears? Because when you're talking about localizing sound, identifying where sound is coming from, getting clear auditory input or maximally clear auditory input, knowing if you don't have hearing from both ears, your ability to know where sound's coming from is really super diminished. And if you know that a kid's hearing is much better on his left than on his right, you need to provide support. You need to provide your instruction primarily from the left, and on and on and on. And you know those things. I believe you all know those things, but I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of those things. So a quick examination of vision. Obviously, vision provides incredible amounts of information about what is in a particular environment. Some studies will tell us that as much as 90%, 90% of what we learn about our world comes from our sense of vision. That's a lot. Vision lets a person know if things are moving toward her or away from her or static, standing still. Vision tells us so much, I believe. If somebody is trying to communicate with us, we communicate so heavily. And again, from that very kind introduction that Kim read about my experiences, I'm all about communication. Almost everything I do connects to communication because I think that's the foundation for everything. So I'll own that, okay? And in particular, I think we devalue, because we don't pay attention. It's not that we say it's not important, but we devalue the importance of gestural communication. And if you can't see well, you don't get the input that people are trying to give you by gestures. Come on, or get back, you're in my space, or hello, if they're waving. And then of course, manual sign is incredibly reliant on vision unless person uses tactile sign, right? It's also important when you're talking about vision to know if vision's available centrally. Again, this is preview of webinar number 2. I want y'all to come back, okay? Is vision available only peripherally, out here, but not in the middle? Are there blind spots? If you've worked with a learner with charge, and again, charge is an incredibly common etiology of deaf-blindness, as we'll see in a few minutes. So here's a preview of later today. kids with the charge almost always have coloboma, which are blind spots in the visual field. And you can well imagine, as you try to present visual information to a learner, you have to present it where they can see it. Even if they do have good vision in a portion of their visual field, if they only have central vision and you present something over here, you're in trouble. If they only have lower field vision and you present it up here, they're in trouble. Have you ever seen kids with charge sit around like this? They sit around like this because typically, again, not all, but typically kids with charge will not have vision in the two upper quadrants, but they will have vision down here. So the way they're actually looking at you is to look at you like this. A little off track, my apologies. So how are we going to categorize this disability of deaf-blindness? How are we going to categorize it? One way to do it is just to talk about, well, is it a hereditary syndrome? Is it a hereditary or genetic disorder? Did something go awry prenatally? Was there some type of injury or illness after birth, postnatal? Is there a family history, in particular with deafness? Certain types of deafness, there is a family history involved. Head injuries can cause deaf-blindness, or direct trauma to the ear or to the eye. The singular most common cause of deaf-blindness is prematurity in the United States, not in the world, but in the United States. And I think that's one way that's very, very interesting, but I don't think it's as pragmatic a way, and I lost my mouse, and I'm really sorry, I'm trying to move this, than if we do it differently. So I want to talk a little bit more about etiologies, and then I'm going to propose a different way to categorize the label this deaf-blindness. In the 2018 NCDB annual census report, more than 70 different etiologies, more than 70 different causes are listed as responsible for producing deaf-blindness in kids birth through 21. 12 of those 70 are identified as the cause of deaf-blindness in 100 or more cases. And remember, we're just under 10,000 learners we're talking about here, birth to 21. At least 12 etiologies are responsible for 100 or more cases. Other etiologies are very, very rare, with fewer than 5 cases being reported across the entire United States. And a couple examples of these are Batten's disease, Prader-Willi syndrome. Maybe let me back up, and I apologize. I'm going back to the second bullet point. Maybe since I've given you a few examples of those extremely rare etiologies, maybe I should give you a few of the causes that have at least 100 cases. Retinopathy of prematurity, Charge syndrome, Usher syndrome, Cornelia de Lange syndrome, Down syndrome, CMV, cytomegalovirus, and the various cephalies, hydrocephaly, microcephaly, all of those, that's 7, are some of the 12 that are responsible for more than 100 cases. And I think this bottom statistic is staggering and very important, that approximately 19%, so let's say 1/5 of the children and youth on the deaf-blind census, we don't know. We don't have an identified etiology of why that particular learner is experiencing deaf-blindness. So we don't have answers for families who want answers so desperately about why. Kim, if you'd be so kind as to launch the third poll, please.
And while we're doing that, Susan, this is Teresa, and I just want to clarify based on a comment from one of our participants that
Sure.
By prematurity, do you mean a preemie baby?
That's a great question. I probably should have been clearer. Thank you. Simply because an infant might be born prematurely, that in and of itself doesn't imply or should not cause a team, a family to infer there will be sensory losses, because there are lots of babies born at 36 weeks, which would be called premature, that don't experience sensory loss at all. We're really talking about retinopathy of prematurity, which comes when babies are born extremely early, anywhere from 26 to 32, 34 weeks. So we're talking about extreme prematurity. And thank you for causing me to clarify that. Does that answer your question?
I believe so. Thanks for all the information.
Okay. So here's a Montana question. I tried to do a little bit of homework. In Montana, how many learners birth through 21, those are those kids served by the Montana Deafblind Project, are currently identified as experiencing deafblindness? First choice, fewer than 12. Second choice, 12 to 20. Third choice, 21 to 35. Fourth choice, 36 to 50. Last choice, more than 50. What do you think?
And this is Kim. We're at 65% voting. So we'll give another 15 seconds here.
There we hit 81.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Oh, they're still going up though.
Okay, good. Let them vote. I think this would be of particular interest to you ladies, Teresa, Kim, and Ellen.
Definitely. Okay, it looks like we've stopped, so I will close the poll and share the result.
All righty. Well, the correct answer is the answer in yellow. Answer number 4, 23%. But the category immediately before and after, you guys are close. So you're certainly in the ballpark. Last year, and Teresa, Ellen, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, last year, the reported number on the NCDB, National Center for Deafblindness website, was 37. Okay, so we're just barely in that yellow category of 37. But Teresa is working on the current census right now, and it looks like for this year, the report may be about 46. Is that correct, Teresa?
That is correct. That would be our reported number this current year once we have all of our information, but that's what it's looking like. Thank you.
And so that's why we set these numbers up. You might think they're a little funky ranges, but we wanted to catch the 36 in case you go to the website, but to also capture the 46. And I want to give a shout out to all of you who are participating with us today, because the reason this number is going from 37 to 46 is not because of anything the National Center is doing, or to be honest, it's not primarily because of what the project staff is doing. They're helping support you, but it's because of what you, the practitioners in the field, the job coaches, the service coordinators, the SLPs, the teachers, it's because of what you are doing as you encounter learners and going, I don't think she sees the way she should. I don't think she hears the way she should. Let's do some assessment. There's more awareness, there's more testing, there's more evaluation, and there's more appropriate labeling. And so I want to give a round of applause to all of you, because I believe, and I Teresa, Ellen, Kim, chime in if you think I'm crazy about this, not about if I'm crazy about other things. I don't want to open it up that much. But I think in the entire state of Montana, there's probably even more than 46 kids birth to 21. But we got to find them and we got to identify them. And the way that's going to happen is because of you in the field. So cheers to you. Thank you for your work. All right, moving on. It didn't like that. Moving on. So categories of DB. I think one very important way to really classify this meaningfully is to talk about the time that the sensory loss onset. And by that, I mean the time of the child's life. If a child, fails a newborn hearing screening, so we're saying he had a severe hearing loss or was deaf at birth, it's very different than if a child loses his hearing as a result of getting hit in the head with a baseball when he's 9, right? Or that a teenager, heaven forbid, loses his hearing because of a closed head injury in a car accident when he's 17. Those things are very different. And that's what I mean by time of onset. How old was the learner? All right. The degree and the type of sensory loss. Again, I got a little carried away earlier with the field stuff with vision, but the degree of sensory loss, like what frequencies of hearing, what frequencies, that's a bad way to say it. What frequencies of environmental stimuli does a learner hear? Well, next time, here we go, I'm doing it again, dangling the carrot. Next time we're going to talk about that. There's a lot of environmental sounds that learners with deaf-blindness are capable of hearing, but they miss sounds in the speech range. And that's really important for us to know, right? If we know, so we can teach them orally through speech and hearing, or if we need to teach them through sign language, it's very important. Or by far, the best predictor of a learner's skills and a learner's needs for you to plan their instruction is number 3, both, to take into account the time of onset and the degrees and types of hearing loss and vision loss. So that's what we're going to do. So time of onset of sensory loss, congenital, present at birth or very shortly after birth, all right? And adventitious is a big science word. I want you to know I can use some scientific words. Some extended time after birth due to illness or injury. And I think the time of onset must be considered in regard to vision loss, and time of onset must be considered in regard to hearing loss. One researcher in the field of deaf-blindness, Stan Monroe, maybe you've heard of him, he premised that we should define congenital loss as anything that happens before a child is 2 years of age. And that was a very controversial statement. And a lot of people in our field don't agree with that. They think that, quote, congenital happens much earlier in a child's life than a sensory impairment developing at 2. I think this is why you will not hear me today saying congenital is to 12 months or congenital is to 18 months or congenital is to 2 years. There's not good agreement in our field, and there's not good research to support what that is. We can definitely say there's benefit to hearing when you're born. There's benefit to seeing when you're born. And we know that, and neuroscientists prove that. I have a couple slides on that. But quantifying that benefit versus proving that there's benefit is a whole different issue. So we can't nail down a particular age. Time of onset is very important because with hearing, a child who has experienced hearing for even a few months of life very likely has some recollection of some sounds or some sound properties. Again, it's that we can prove benefit, but we can't quantify the benefit. Same with vision. If a child had vision until she was 11 months of age, she very likely might have some residual vision or visual imaging about boundaries of things, people, and we can't dismiss those things. I don't want to get too heavily into the neuroscience, but neuroscience has demonstrated beyond the shadow of a doubt that early sensory input, even if it only exists for a short period of time, has incredible benefits, all right? And that sensory input begins to structurally change the brain from the moment a child is born. So sensory input actually changes brain structure. We all know that brains, human brains, are incredibly plastic when an infant is born, but they start to be structured or restructured by the type and amount of sensory input kids get. This is why you say, read to your child, talk to your child, show your child visual stimuli, blah, blah, blah. There is neuroscientific benefit that studies have demonstrated about this, that experiencing hearing or vision is sufficient to initiate visual cortical development. It's sufficient to initiate auditory cortical development. It's amazing. The best study that I can cite, so it's the only study I'm going to talk about all day, and I hope I don't offend anybody with it, but it's powerful to me. There were these researchers named Hubel and Weissel. You may have heard about this study. They did a study with kittens, newborn kittens, and so it's kind of gross if you're a cat lover, and I'm sorry, but it's important. At least they did it with animals and not with kids, right? And I say that tongue in cheek because we could not do this study on human beings. But with some of the kittens, they sewed their eyelids shut when they were born. And they exposed those kittens to the same exact visual experiences. It was a very controlled experience. They kept them in certain cages and let them out in certain places. And it was a rigorous study. And when they unstitched those kittens' eyelids, the kittens who had been deprived of normal visual experience during critical periods of development in their early lives showed exceptionally different circuitry in the neurons of their brain, in the visual cortex. So the neurons in the visual cortex of those kittens' brains were totally different from the neuronal connections in the brains of the kittens who could see. And again, that's why we have animal studies. We can never do that with human beings. But the important point about their study is those changes, those cortical changes in the brain, are irreversible. So early onset has much more powerful impact than later onset. Early sensory input is critical to future sensory development. And here I have a comment that sort of goes to the chat point Teresa raised a little bit. The timing of a premature infant's birth really does affect the potential for developing sensory problems, particularly visual problems, because the brain is very, very facile. If neurons aren't used for one thing, they're taken over and used for something else. One more neuroscience slide. The key is the point at which the developing sensory input makes a transition to higher order process. In other words, when does the brain switch over from just taking sound and sight to converting it to something meaningful through a cognitive process? And we don't know. We have proof of that benefit, but to quantify when and how that actually occurs, we don't know. We don't know what that exact point is at which sensory input is sufficient to establish connections in the system, okay? That's why I'm so uncomfortable with saying that congenital loss happens at 2 years. I'm just really not comfortable with that, but I felt like I needed to share it with you. Connections in the system lead to development that ultimately yield meaningful, lasting sensory experiences that kids can use in authentic functional settings and beneficial ways that can benefit them all the way. Beneficial that can benefit, bad sentence. Beneficial ways that they can use in meaningful contexts, even when it's employment, right? As one neuroscientist said to me, neurons that fire together, wire together. And I love that. If they fire together enough from any early sensory input, they're going to wire together and they're going to stay wired together for future use. Also, in terms of time of onset, the individualized development of visual and auditory skills is really important. especially for those of you who are speech language pathologists, you could talk about this in a more knowledgeable way than I can probably. But the literature in special education highlights that it's important to note if a child loses hearing or significantly experiences a loss of hearing, prelingually or postlingually, and that's before they develop spoken language and comprehension of spoken language, or after they do. There is a much younger age proposed than the 2 or 3 years for truly having lingual ability, language ability. Much younger age proposed, perhaps as young as 18 months, for visual skills such as visual searching, the ability to be vertical. When kids go from crawling and being on the ground to being able to be vertical and independently mobile, it totally changes your visual awareness and your spatial awareness. And those kinds of things are really important. The second category, I lied. Before I do this, I need the fourth poll, please, Kim. If you could find the fourth poll for me. I almost skipped it. Thank you. So what I'm asking you here is we're going to shift to a brief discussion of the types of sensory losses kids might experience in 4 categories. So your first checkbox is they have deaf-blindness is identified by a loss of vision or hearing quality only. Second choice, deaf-blindness is only identified by a diminishment of the range through which a learner can see or hear. Third choice, deaf-blindness may be identified by a processing deficit of visual or auditory information in the brain. Fourth one, deaf-blindness may only be identified if all 3 of the dimensions mentioned above are impacted.
Susan, this is Kim. Since this is a tougher question, how about another 30 seconds and I'll close the poll?
Sounds fine. It is tough, and I'm not sure that I worded it as well as maybe I could have. It's a trickier one.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the responses.
Thank you. So I love this. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you. Because like I say, reading this back to y'all, I'm thinking, oh, Susan, you could have done a better job. The answer for which I was looking was that, what is this shown in blue? 41% maybe deaf-blindness may be identified by a processing deficit of visual or auditory information in the brain. That is absolutely correct. And I'm happy, I'm content, because the 45% of you who said only if all 3 dimensions are impacted, because then that at least shows me you are open to the notion that it can be a processing loss or processing impairment that may qualify a learner's deaf-blindness. The reason that the blue one is the correct answer instead of pink, green, or yellow was the other said only it's quality loss, or only it's a range loss, or they have to show losses in quality and range and processing, and that's the yellow one, and that's what I didn't want you to think. So it may be identified, deaf-blindness may be identified by a processing deficit in the brain. Thank you, Kim. So let's move on to The second category is degree or type of sensory loss. This is simpler information. I think this is going to be more familiar. A partial loss, so some functional vision and or some functional hearing skills remain. Total, essentially no functionality. And then if there's a unilateral or bilateral loss, one ear, one eye versus 2 eyes, 2 ears, and the degree needs to be considered in regard to both vision and hearing loss. Now, what I've suggested to you in an earlier slide is the preferred method in my world, and I think I can make an argument for it with the literature, is that the best thing to do is to qualify that's wrong, to categorize kids' hearing and vision losses in ways that consider both time of onset and degree and type. So we're going to take category 1 that I offered you and category 2 that I offered you, and we're going to slam them together, and we're going to come up with these 4 categories. Congenital hearing and congenital vision. Very, very early in life, vision and hearing are impaired. Adventitious hearing and vision losses. Sometime later in life. Again, we can't put a number on that age, all right? But sometime later. And then we're going to flip them out. Congenital hearing loss and sometime later vision loss, or congenital vision loss and sometime later hearing loss. To me, these are what are functional for educators. These are the things we need to know. How long, how much was that child able to take in and process visual information? How long, how much was that child able to process auditory information? Those are the things that make a difference in terms of how we teach. Even in this dual model, where we're considering time of onset and degree, kids' losses have to be considered individually. You know, I've heard the phrase in regard to autism. People will say, you've met one child with autism? Well, good. You've met one child with autism. And what I would suggest to you is to say, we can say the same thing about learners who experience deaf-blindness. You've taught one learner experience deaf-blindness. You've met one individual who experiences deaf-blindness. Good for you. You've met one learner who experiences deaf-blindness, because this group of learners is incredibly heterogeneous. These kids are no more like each other. Even kids with the same etiology, kids with charge, can be incredibly different. Kids who have CMV can be incredibly different. And we need to remember to judge these learners individually. So what I'm going to do is to show you a few of the types of diagnoses that come in each of these categories. And we're going to go through this kind of quickly, but you'll have the slides available. You already do. In the congenital hearing and vision losses, so this is from birth, all right? Rubella, we all know about the old rubella epidemic that hit in the 50s, 60s. It's way, way down, but it's starting to come back. 33 cases a couple years ago. CMV, there are significant problems with kids who have deaf-blindness due to CMV. More than 100 cases on our national census. Then all the cephalies, hydrocephalus, microcephalus, more than 100 cases. We also can include in this category babies born to mothers who have syphilis, toxoplasmosis, toxins ingested by the mother during pregnancy, or birth trauma. Now, please, try to ward off something that might come up in the chat, I am not saying if the mother has syphilis and delivers a baby, the baby will be deaf-blind. I'm not saying that. I'm saying these are common, and that's true for everything on this slide, okay? These are causes that often can result in deaf-blindness, but they do not automatically cause deaf-blindness, okay? So that's at birth, both are impaired. Others, at birth, Both are impaired. Prematurity, the most common cause in the national census overall. When I made this slide, it was 991. The newest report I was able to access is 1,050 kids in the United States. 1,050 in the United States, with retinopathy of prematurity being the main cause. Used to be called retrolental fibroplasia, RF. Cerebral palsy can yield deaf-blindness. Leber's syndrome, Charge syndrome. Charge syndrome is the most common hereditary syndrome responsible for a deaf-blind diagnosis. Again, when I made this slide a month ago for the folks in Montana, it was 958. The newest report I just accessed, Charge syndrome, is second only to prematurity. The new Charge syndrome number is 1,033. Trisomy 13 is another cause. Congenital hearing and congenital vision. All right, losses, impairments. Now we're going to switch and we're going to do the flip. We're going to do the adventitious or later in life hearing and vision losses. All right, any kind of trauma due to accident, injury, sports, vehicular, meningitis, encephalitis, toxins that particular child would ingest. Usher syndrome type 3, well over 100 cases on our census of Usher syndrome 3. Friedreich's ataxia, neurofibromatosis. Again, you'll have these available. I know I don't expect you to remember them, but if you get a diagnostic report on a learner who has one of these things, you might do a little exploration about possible deaf-blindness. These are later in life, adventitious hearing and vision losses. Now we're going to category 3. This is a hearing loss or hearing impairment at birth and an adventitious vision loss, all right? Hearing loss congenitally, later in life vision loss. It's not uncommon for shaken baby syndrome, diabetic retinopathy, Usher syndromes type 1 and type 2. And I've given you some time points on there with type 1. The field loss, visual field loss is usually identified during elementary. With type 2, the loss is typically noted in middle to late teenage years. Macular degeneration, but typically that's even post 21 when kids are out of school. Okay? And the last category, and then we'll see if there are any questions, Teresa. We're talking about congenital vision loss and later in life or adventitious hearing loss. Any kind of trauma, injury, tumor, again, you're going to see meningitis, encephalitis. It's kind of a wide open. This is a less specific category. So before I get to the final 4 slides that really preview what's coming up, are there any questions about the system I'm proposing to you, how you might look at a categorization of deaf-blindness etiologies?
Thank you, Susan. We do not have any questions that have come in through the question box or chat box.
Okay, well, we're just going to keep on going. So this is the final section. As I say, this is really a preview, but I think with this foundation laid, I hope you're not asking questions because it makes sense, not because I've totally confused you. The impact of deaf-blindness on environmental interactions, the impact of deaf-blindness on academic interactions. I hope you're saying, yeah, Susan, if you're not going to talk to us about this, what difference does all this make? To which I would answer, the stuff we've talked about for about the last hour, not quite an hour, is that's how we get these children and young adults identified. We have to be aware of their needs. We have to be able to identify their needs to get some grip on the extent and type of their needs if we're going to be able to address those needs. And if we're going to be able to truly plan and implement instructional programs that will address how deaf-blindness impacts that learner's environmental interaction and how deaf-blindness impacts that learner's academic interactions. So, one of my favorite things to say is that deaf-blindness is a disability about information gathering. That says it all to me. I don't know if that will speak to any of you to the degree it speaks to me, but if you will think back to what we talked about half an hour ago, that deaf-blindness impacts 2 of an individual's 3 distance senses, the other one being smell, and if the kid has charge, it probably impacts all 3 distance senses. Yeah, that individual is going to be incredibly limited in terms of gathering information about the environment because he has to be able to either taste something, touch something, or feel the movement of something to get information about it. Wowza, the environment shrinks when you are limited to your impact senses to gather information, right? So it limits, deaf-blindness limits access. And you say, well, it limits access to what? And at the risk of sounding like a smart aleck, because that's not my intention, I would say to everything. Deaf-blindness limits your access to everything other than your very own body, right? It's also very important, I believe, for us to remember that deaf-blindness is a disability that is exponentially more than a vision loss plus a hearing loss. Some people say, oh, well, it's vision loss and a hearing loss equals DB. No, it's like log graph paper versus regular graph paper. It's exponentially different. So Teresa, if you'd launch our last poll for us, we're about to wind up here. Not Teresa, Kim, I'm sorry. Kim, would you launch the 5th poll, please? Most folks who work in the field of deaf-blindness identify 3 primary types of information gathering or learning, which is identified as one of the primary challenges learners who have deaf-blindness experiences. All right? So I want you to select one of the following that talks about the types of learning: direct and systematic instruction, direct instruction and modeling, incidental and secondary learning, or direct, secondary, and incidental learning. And there's a clue in the way we shortcut that question.
Susan, while they're answering that question, a comment did come in that applied to some of what we were talking about previously. So I want to put that forward for you.
Okay.
Is medication causes be an adventitious?
An adventitious loss?
Yes. Yes, I believe that is a question.
Could be caused by medication. Once again, I'm not trying to give you a non-answer. It depends on how old the person was when he's taking the medication that caused that side effect. If it's a medication that's been given to a 6-month-old, man, I don't know. I don't know. I would be inclined to consider that a congenital loss. Stan Monroe would definitely consider it congenital because he goes up to 2 years of age. If it's a 3-year-old, I would very clearly say that yes, medication-induced sensory loss, and there are a lot, by the way, folks, of pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs that impair hearing, that have negative otologic consequences, lots of them. And if it happens at 3 years of age or older, I'd probably say 2 years of age or older, I'd call it adventitious. Yes, I would. And I'm sorry, but I can't put a number on where that breaks. So it's the best I've got. I'm sorry.
And this is Kim. I'll go ahead and close the poll. It looks like we have 75% voting.
And look at this. You people are just brilliant. 90% direct learning, secondary learning, and incidental learning. Ding, 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 ding. Yep, you got it. Thank you. That is exactly right. We ended on a high note today, and I'm going to briefly talk about those, and then we're going to be finished. Kim, if you could shut that down, that'd be great. Thank you. So those are the main types of information gathering. Direct learning is direct systematic instruction. If some of you come at the field of deaf-blindness from the field of severe disabilities like I did, the Snell and Brown books forever about systematic instruction for learners with multiple disabilities. They talk about direct learning, systematic instruction through backwards chaining, forwards chaining, task analysis, prompts and prompt fading, just that one-on-one or small group direct learning. Ding, ding, ding. Secondary learning through modeling, through larger group instruction, not individualized instruction per se, secondary learning. And number 3, incidental learning. Again, I'm not trying to be crass, but it's that kind of learning. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about these in the 3rd webinar, that most kids who are typically developing things they learn by just being alive, just being in the world and playing with other children and interacting with their families. They learn incidentally, just by being a participant actively in the world. And kids with deaf-blindness typically don't learn that way. They can't learn that way. They don't have access to the world to learn that way. And very, very much of kids, again, depending on how severe the hearing and vision losses are, very much of the instruction of kids with deaf-blindness needs to rely on direct systematic learning, direct instruction. Teaching kids with deaf-blindness involves, I love this phrase, I wish it were mine. It's not. Jan van Dyke, some of you have been in the field of deaf-blindness for a long time, have heard him say it. It's his, it's not mine. We are inviting the child, and I put parenthetically adolescent, we're inviting that child out of her own body to join us in the world. That's what partnering with a kid with deaf-blindness means to me. That's what teaching a learner with deaf-blindness means to me. Inviting her to join me in the world and my supporting her to build levels of connection with me and levels of connection with objects and people and activities and things in the world. It requires us as partners to plan how a learner is going to receive information in every single activity. It requires us to plan how that learner is going to actively participate, or what that learner is going to do in every activity to show us what she understands and what she doesn't understand. This is webinar 3. This is just preview. And it's very important for partners to consider the immediate physical, visual, and auditory context of every single activity you do with kids. For the majority of kids, children, young adults who experience deaf-blindness, the way they receive information and the way they express information is very likely to be different. They might receive information through hearing, and they might sign to express information, or they might receive information by watching gestures, but then they might speak some sounds. All different combos, but the way kids with deaf-blindness get information and the way they send information are very likely to not be the same. And that's a tricky, tricky thing for teams. So that's what I have for you today. I sincerely appreciate your attention, your participation. That's my email. Feel free to email me. I'm really good about getting back to people. I'm not always as fast as some people would like me to be, but if you email me, I will get back to you. That's my phone number. You can call me. And if you have questions after today is over, please do that. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. Teresa, Kim, Ellen, if you want to use that time.
This is Teresa. Besides appreciation for how much information you have been giving, which I'm getting in the question box as well, there is a question that I will put forward for you. Are there more females with deaf blindness than males with deaf blindness? I know our Montana information is very balanced.
Wow. I need to check on that. The national information is fairly balanced, but skewed slightly to males, which seems to be opposite of what, well, maybe not. It's opposite of what the question was. But that's variant by the specific disability or etiology. Some etiologies, like Prader-Willi, shows up much more commonly in females than males, but that's also not a heavy cause of deaf blindness. So not category by category is what I said necessarily true, but if you take the population of just under 10,000, slightly more males than females.
And this is Kim. While we wait to see if folks have other questions that they would like to type in, I'll just do our housekeeping information. And just a reminder that when today's webinar ends, the short survey will pop up, and please do fill that out. If you don't have time to fill it out today, a link to the survey will be provided to you in a follow-up email tomorrow. So please fill it out tomorrow if you don't have a chance today. As Susan has advertised, there are 2 more webinars in this series. The next one is on April 7th from 1 until 2:30 Mountain Time. And the final session is on April 21st from 1 until 2:30. The registration for both of those sessions is open. If you just go to the website, either of the 2 websites, and I've put the URLs or website addresses in your chat box, you can register from there. Please know that just because you registered for today's session does not automatically register you for the next 2. You do have to sign up for those separately. The recording for today's webinar will be posted on both of our websites. It takes up to 2 weeks because I need to edit the captions. We have to get those connected to the video and get them posted. But do be looking for the recording in about 2 weeks, and please share it with anyone else you think might benefit from this information. I'll turn it back over to Teresa in case we have other questions.
Teresa,
I don't have questions showing up, just an appreciation for the amount of information provided and comments that they will be back for 2 and 3.
I hope so. I looked up while you were talking, Kim. I was listening out of one ear. I was listening unilaterally. How about that? I checked the most recent report on the National Center for Deaf Blindness, says that over time, the distribution by sex is approximately 55% male and 45% female. So I was accurate in saying more males than females, but it's approximately 55-45. And this most recent report bumps it just over 10,000. So there you go. And again, I applaud that to increased awareness and increased identification for services. So you made me teach myself something. So thank you for that.
Hey, Susan, this is Ellen, and I have a question.
Sure.
Do you know of any state systems that are doing any additional screening based on the some of the genetic causes of deaf blindness or some of the environmental causes? Like, I know all the states are doing the early hearing screenings,
Right.
but are any other state that you know of adding like another level in there?
I know that in one, I'm not as aware as I probably could be, Ellen, about what's going on in all the states in the country. I just can't keep up with it all. I know in one state where I've worked, there was routine screening done by deaf-blind project staff in conjunction with staff from the State School for the Blind, and they screened for Usher syndrome.
Okay.
I know that was done regularly. That's Kansas. That was done in Kansas.
Okay.
The nurse from the School for the Blind accompanied folks from the State Deaf-Blind Project and actually physically took the show on the road and did screening for Usher syndrome. I'm trying to think if I know of anything else. There are clinics popping up around the country. I'll use one as an example, and not because it's the only one, but it is a reputable one. Cincinnati Children's Hospital has quite an active screening effort underway to identify kids with charge syndrome. They are developing a very reputable, large charge syndrome clinic at that hospital. So there are people that travel from really quite far distances to Cincinnati to have their kids screened for charge. But again, that's not in conjunction with the Ohio State Deafblind Project, but it is a concerted effort for identification. Many kids born with charge, it's pretty obvious, but there are kids with more subtle signs that aren't diagnosed until they're 6, 7, 8 years of age or older. Trying to think if I know of anything else. I really don't, Ellen, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Susan, this is,
yeah, go.
I just wanted to let you know there was an appreciation of the biological and technical information you provided today. And then a question about, in our handouts, we have a worksheet, and you had mentioned that you wanted people to think about how they would incorporate this into their daily practice. So the question was whether or not you want those sent to you, or if we would be discussing those later. So if you please clarify that item.
I would be happy to clarify that. There is no expectation on my part whatsoever for you to send those to me. If you have made notes on there about something of which you're unsure, like what the heck did she mean by that? Or is this how I should translate this other thing? If you scan it and email it to me and you want my input on it, Ellen and Teresa and Kim will tell you I can come up with an opinion about anything pretty much. So I'll give you an opinion if you would like feedback from me, but it isn't required at all. And again, as a preview, I guess I should be ashamed of myself for advertising the webinars. There's an action plan sheet for the second and third webinars too. So you can keep your first sheet if you were here today and just add to it. I just hope that everybody found something that they want to remember. And if you want me to take a look, shoot it my direction, but there's no need to do that.
Hey, Susan, this is Ellen, and I have a suggestion.
Okay.
If those of you who wrote something down about how you're going to apply this information could jot it down on your evaluation, we would love to hear that. And we could even start off the next webinar with some of those comments.
I love that, Ellen. That is great. That's why there's 4 of us doing this and not just one. No, I mean it. That is fabulous. And because then if you would share that information with me, then maybe I can integrate that. I know I've already got the PowerPoints to you for the rest of the webinars, but I could integrate that stuff in my comments. So yeah, I would. You compile it on the evaluations. That's brilliant. I love it. Thank you. Great, great, great.
And with that, we are at time. Susan, Ellen, Teresa, any final comments from any of you? And I'll start with you, Susan, as our presenter.
I'm serious. I just want to thank you all. I know you have lots of things. You're all teachers and related service folks and job coaches and transition specialists. You could have spent an hour and a half today in a lot of ways other than this. So I'm grateful. It shows me you care. It shows me you want to learn to support kids with deaf-blindness more effectively. And I love that. And I appreciate your passion for that. And thank you. And Ellen, Kim, and Teresa, thank you for this opportunity with which you provided me.
Ellen, Teresa, comments from either of you?
Yeah, this is Ellen, and thank you, Susan. We've been waiting a lot. We've been in negotiations a long time figuring out our mode of delivery, so I'm glad that you that we finally were able to pull it off and get you here.
We made it happen.
We did. Yeah, and for those of you who are participating in today's webinar and are thinking, wow, I should have dragged like a family to participate in this webinar or a colleague, please go ahead and invite them to the second and third one. And like all of our webinars, they will be archived and posted. The links will be posted on the website.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And any comments from you, Teresa?
No comments in the question box or the chat. So thank you all so much for joining us today.
All right, and with that, I will offer a final thank you to Susan for the fantastic presentation and the information that there's so much there. I look forward to going back over it several times to try and cement it in my brain. Thank you, Teresa and Ellen, for your assistance with the webinar today. Thank you to our 2 captioning professionals, and thank you to all of you for being part of our audience. Have a great rest of your week. We hope to see you at session number 2.
Absolutely.